President, nice to see you. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with why you're here and some of the meetings that you had, both with the Prime Minister and the Governor General, talking, I think, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, a lot about Arctic security.
Yeah.
And I wonder why those conversations are important in this moment.
Well, probably two reasons. One, I think when it's rough times around the world, you need friends. And I've always felt that Finland and Canada are quite close. I mean, it's not only hockey, it's not only geography, but it's also security. So I'm here with 40 Finnish companies, from the defense industry, from tech, from mining, from satellites, from quantum. And I think we have a lot of synergies. And of course, then also in maritime issues and shipbuilding and icebreakers and the rest of it. So that's a sort of practical thing. Then the other one is just to suss out what's going on in the world. Your Prime Minister and I, we're very close. We think about things very similarly. We're trying to understand this shift in the world. What do middle powers like Canada do? What do small powers like Finland do? How can we cooperate in the Arctic? What do we do with the Nordics? What do we do in NATO? What does Canada do with the EU? So many interesting things going on, and that's why it's good to be here.
Yeah, and I'm happy to ask some of those topics. I did want to ask, though, about sort of sovereignty, because again, the President, after meeting with the Secretary General last week, again threatened Greenland. We talked a lot about that in this country because we felt it was a little too close for comfort. We've also felt those threats. I wonder how those threats factor into conversations around Arctic security between Finland and Canada.
Well, I want to see the silver lining in it. I mean, I obviously feel very uncomfortable when someone makes a territorial threat to a Nordic country, the Kingdom of Denmark, and then therefore Greenland. But the silver lining is, okay, let's focus on Arctic security. And I want to bring that into the NATO context and think about who projects power in the Arctic. Well, it's countries like Finland, Sweden, Norway, and, for instance, Canada. Finland, we have obligatory military service, conscription. 1 million women and men have been trained in Arctic conditions. So how can we utilize that and help if someone is worried about Arctic security? So I want to see this as a bridge towards Arctic security cooperation in NATO. But, I would be lying if I said I feel comfortable with this type of language. I don't.
Well, you are, with Canada and the U.S., part of this trilateral icebreaker collaboration effect. And I wonder if you are still comfortable with that agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I see the connection. Some people try to make that, but to be honest, to be very blunt, if you want to take over Greenland, you don't need icebreakers. But if you want to have Arctic security, you need icebreakers. And of course, Canada has 18 icebreakers going up to 2021. We're building half of one for you. We're building 11 to the U.S. And we need to cooperate on this. The U.S. So you have 18 icebreakers. We have 8. The U.S. has 1.
Yes.
So obviously, if they want to, be serious about the Arctic, we need to help them. But this we sort of take as a different issue from the from the Greenland context.
So the threats in and of itself don't make you uncomfortable with being in that agreement?
No, I don't think about it from that perspective. I think about the number one threat in the Arctic is Russia. And then we have to think about who can project power against Russia long term.
Right.
And I would say the United States is a pretty good bet on that because they're part of the alliance, NATO.
Well, because you brought up Russia, let me ask about that. I believe that just recently you said that you felt maybe things are turning in Ukraine, that they've had a better winter on the battlefield than you expected. Why do you say that?
Yeah, not only that, I want to take it even further. So two things. First, if you look at not only intelligence, but the situation on the battlefield, from December to April, Ukraine is killing, and I know this sounds quite morbid, but 30 to 35,000 Russians per month. The Russians are not able to recruit as many as they're losing. And the kills happen at a ratio of 1 to 5, so 1 Ukrainian for 5 Russians, and 95% happens unmanned, in other words, with drones. They are now not gaining territory, but taking back some territory that they have lost. And on top of that, in the month of March, for the first time, they launch more missiles and drones into Russia than Russia launches into Ukraine. So that's my first point. My second point is that we need to turn the tide. This is not anymore about giving an alimony to Ukraine. We have to think about it the other way around. Can we afford to keep Ukraine outside, in the sense that they now have the greatest military know-how, and they're showing that in the Gulf region, defending the Gulf states from Iran. And I hope the Americans understand and see this. So,
but what do you mean by keeping them outside? You mean keeping them out of NATO? Is that
well,
what you mean
I would
specifically?
prefer in the long run to see Ukraine in NATO. I know for political reasons some people have problems with that, but let's think about it really seriously. I mean, what are the biggest conventional militaries in Europe or in Europe right now? They're Turkey, Ukraine, Poland, and Finland. Should we not use this and to understand that the Russian threat is not going away? So what then gives us comfort? In my mind, it's Ukraine. So I think the first year in the war was about survival for Ukraine. The next 3 years were about resilience, and now it's about pure maths. And that math tells us a story that Ukraine is actually doing quite well, and we need help from them in modern warfare rather than the other way around.
So the idea of a peace plan that the president talked about for some time, it seems to have fizzled away.
Yeah.
You don't think that's possible anymore?
Yeah, I think we're working on three base scenarios for this year. One is that the war continues. Two is that there's a peace agreement, and three is that one party or the other weakens. And I think scenario one is the most likely, so the war will continue.
Let me ask you a little bit about NATO, because there again, the president continues to be frustrated with NATO, particularly because there was no sort of active participation in clearing the Strait of Hormuz. Do you think that's something that NATO should be involved in?
NATO as an alliance, no, because we are a defense alliance. The only time we have invoked Article 5 collective defense was 9/11, when the United States was attacked.
Yeah.
Finland wasn't in NATO at the time, but we still went to Afghanistan with 2,500 soldiers to show solidarity in the fight against terrorism. But individual states, yes, they have to show, how they can help. Because the basic idea is that, if the U.S. needs bases in an allied country, they should be able to use them. And as a matter of fact, they've been able to do that. There's this sort of misunderstanding, I think, in some quarters of the U.S. administration that hasn't taken place. I mean, yes, Spain is an exception, but other than that, and now on Friday, we have a meeting with level of heads of state and government on thinking about how we can help the U.S. in keeping the Hormuz Straits open.
But do you worry that that is viewed as an endorsement of what the United States did in Iran?
No, because we're talking pretty much about activity that happens after the war is over.
Okay.
So it's very difficult for a country like Finland, to intervene in this type of situation. At the same time, we're adamant about protecting the freedom of navigation, which we think is a sine qua non for trade.
Part of that displeasure, I will say, that the president had expressed last week was also him saying, well, if NATO doesn't help us or NATO allies don't help us, we will retaliate, we will pull things out of NATO countries. Some people view that kind of rhetoric as damaging to NATO, kind of undermining the alliance. I'd be interested to know what you think.
Well, I've had a chance to speak to the president about it, of course, as a new NATO member state. And I always stress that deterrence is really about two things. One is trust, and that's sort of the strategic communication. And I, don't deny the fact that this type of language is not helpful. But the other part is then the real stuff, or your capacity to project power through conventional forces, through missiles, and through a nuclear deterrence. And I don't see that diminishing from the American side. There is a burden shifting, I fully admit, and I'm okay with that. I think Europe should take more responsibility for its own security. It's easy for me to say as a Finn because we've always done that alone, but we feel that many other NATO member states need to do that as well. And the most important thing is that this burden shifting is organized and structured and scheduled and not abrupt.
I think you've described American foreign policy right now as transactional.
Yes.
So what does that mean then when countries like Finland, like Canada, are trying to reach agreements or a common front with the U.S. president?
Yeah. So the way in which I see it, foreign policy is usually based on three pillars: values, interests, and power. And I think we need to talk about the world as it is, not as we would wish it to be. On values, I think the American MAGA movement has moved quite far to the right, and this is not an insult, it's a reality that we have to live with. In terms of interest, a lot of it is actually financial and transactional, and it's about deals, whether on minerals or other things. It's a fact as well. And the projection of power is different. It used to be with allies and international institutions. Now the US goes it alone quite often. So what do I then do? Well, I try to focus on things that I can influence, like icebreakers or a defense cooperation agreement between the US and Finland, or technological cooperation, defense cooperation in general. So we have to be very pragmatic. So understand that we disagree on some things like climate or international institutions, but understand that it's in our mutual interest that we cooperate in defense. That's the approach I take.
That's a very rational approach.
It is.
Is it received in the same way?
In the US, Finnish-US relations are actually very close. So
yes.
Interesting enough, and you have to understand, the Trump administration doesn't love international institutions. I think that's quite clear.
Yes.
But it does like transactional bilateral relations. And I feel that our relation with the US on a bilateral level is very good.
How have you forged that, other than being able to hit a golf ball with the president? You know, people call you the Trump whisperer. You're one of a few people that get that title. What is it? You've just been able to charm him?
Just on the Trump whisperer thing. I mean, again, let's be realistic. I mean, I come from a small country. President Trump has very much his own mind. If I get one idea out of 10, I'm very happy. But quite rarely is it a whispering; it's more shouting that happens, and that's absolutely fine. So I'm just pleased that as President of Finland, I have a working relationship with the President of the United States, and it is clear that you never agree on everything. So I just think it's important that in diplomacy you have to engage, even if sometimes it feels quite uncomfortable. And that pertains to all 200 leaders around the world.
But this is a leader unlike one that we've seen before. I think in your book you talk about the two moments, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and then what has happened with the United States and rules-based order. So I'd be curious to know how you keep sort of a level head, which you seem to have when you're having those conversations.
I think Finns and Canadians are quite similar, sort of. We're cool, calm, and collected, except in the ice hockey rink. And then when the going gets tough, we go to the sauna and take an ice bath and calm down. That's what you have to do. And I'm also, I'm realistic about the capacity of Finland to project power. I come from a small country. So for me, information is power, and relationships is power. I can project hard power only by being the commander-in-chief and having a big army, but that doesn't give me power globally. So I just have to use my cards wisely. Sometimes I feel I succeed, at other times I don't. Mr.
Carney's, the Prime Minister's speech at Davos and all the attention it got. There are a lot of similarities between your book and his speech. But I think you've also said that one of the primary differences is he views this moment as a rupture, whereas you seem a little more optimistic. So tell me why you don't think it's a rupture, why it's just a moment that is evolving, perhaps.
Well, I think foreign policy and diplomacy is never completely binary. It's not black and white unless we go into war. And I think what both Mark and I are trying to work out, we agree on the fact that the world order is changing, much like it did after World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. He uses the word rupture, which is tougher language. It's a little bit like the editorial of an economist. You push it out there, and then he comes with a solution. His solution is middle powers, because he still believes in interdependence.
Sure.
And I agree with him on that. Then again, I come from a small country which is not a middle power, but we're in the EU. So I want to use kind of regional cooperation as an element. And what Canada is probably doing now is reaching out for different types of deals, like with India or the EU or the Nordic countries. So it's a very wise movement. So, when Mark and I discuss, we then try to figure out, okay, what's the best way to keep what we can from the multilateral world order, because it is still functioning in terms of the UN exists, the WTO exists, the IMF exists, and the World Bank exists. So we have to do some deep thinking and then some practical proposals.
Well, I'll come to an end shortly, but one of the things you would like is for Canada to be part of the EU? I mean, technically that's not possible. Or maybe it's a joke, but do you think that is Obviously, Canada is strengthening that relationship. What would you like us to do further?
Okay, so this is a dangerous question because I wrote my PhD on flexible integration.
Oh dear, yes.
Basically the idea that not every EU member state has to do the same thing, and that we can have very flexible relations between the EU and other players. I think Canada, in terms of its hold, composure, its value base, is so close to the European Union that the least we can do is to forge a really close strategic partnership. And what that then leads to in the end with the EU, which started as 6, ended up with 28, then after Brexit with 27, I don't know. I can envisage a much larger EU. Whether Canada is a part of it or not is up to Canada to decide.
I'll end on this. I heard you joking around with the Prime Minister when you guys were playing hockey. And you said, I think, that you text every day, almost every day.
Yeah, we're in touch. Yeah, we signal.
Your signal, that's good to know. What is it like in this moment to be world leaders and trying, as sounds like you are, to figure things out? Is the pressure enormous? Do you feel like you are living a moment of history? What is that like?
No, you can't think of it like that. First of all, I'm happy that we have modern communications. I don't understand how people did it in the good old days, with telegrams or letters or whatever. But it gives you a capacity to coordinate. So for a small country like myself, information is power. So if I have a piece of information, I'll send it to Mark. If Mark has a piece of information, he might inform me. Sometimes we have group chats with close allies. And do I feel the pressure? No, not really, because I'm quite focused on what we do. And you also have to understand that you have, at the end of the day, rather limited impact. It is super interesting, sometimes quite frustrating, at many days very tragic, but we have to be very pragmatic, find solutions, and at the end of the day, I'm no optimist. If you don't know how things are going to end up, assume that they will end up all good.
Mr. President, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.